I know it's very late as it's now mid-August, however, I haven't done a sort of sit-down video about books and reading and my history with that before, and so I found Larry Reed's doing the mid-year book tag and thought I would give that a bit of a try. Larry herself has said that she is not the original creator of this tag. However, at this point I haven't figured out who is. If I do find out while editing, I will chuck a link and a credit to them. But Larry is who I got all these questions from. Before we start the tag, I thought I'd just give a brief rundown of my history of reading. So I was really into reading as a child and sort of teenager, young teenager. I started off with my dad reading me things like The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and the earlier Harry Potters. And then when I got old enough, I started reading the Harry Potters myself, to the point where I remember we were in Germany when I was 12 doing a tour, and I made us go to a German bookstore when it was so close to closing that its roller doors were coming down, just so I could buy the 7th Harry Potter, and luckily they had it in English so that I could read it on the bus. Then in the sort of, how old would I have been, around 12, 13 is when Twilight came out, and that really pushed me into the young adult fantasy realm of books, reading things like Twilight, reading things like Vampire Academy, True Blood, which I should not have been reading at the age I was reading, as well as other fantasy books like Shadowhunters and dystopia like Divergent, and then every now and then sort of like more girly romance, contemporary fiction stuff like The Princess Diaries and all the John Green books. That was the other thing. So with that big sort of Twilight boom, I really got into the vampire fantasy realm, as well as branching out a bit as well. I was reading a lot at that time. And then sort of when I was around 16, I'd say it was, is when YouTube really started taking off, and I started watching content a lot more than reading books, and just generally using the internet more. That was sort of when I was 15, 16 was also when the internet really started becoming a thing that everyone used, and you had a personal computer and the internet had things on it to entertain you and things like that. So it just started becoming more of my source of entertainment rather than reading. I would still read a few books when sort of series that I was already reading, when the new books of them would come out, like the House of Night series I think was still being released at that time. I think because my last few books here you can see are coloured versus the black, so I think they were still getting released and that's why they're in a different edition. So things like that, but definitely not as much. And I would read a bit of fan fiction as well. That was my main source of reading, but it still wasn't to the level that I was reading sort of in my earlier years. Then when I graduated high school and went to university, I pretty much stopped reading altogether. Wasn't really even reading fan fiction at that point. Again, sort of series would come out or authors that I wanted to read would come out. So because I was so big into Shadowhunters, when Infernal Devices and Dark Artifices came out, I of course picked them up, although I think I was quite delayed. I think with Infernal Devices I read it quite on its release schedule, but I think Dark Artifices I was sort of a bit more delayed with. I can't remember exactly, it's been quite a while. That was all I would read. I'd read maybe 1 or 2 books a year, if that, and I was just busy doing life. Then sort of since sort of I guess 2020, the big book talk thing booming, and I just was like, oh yeah, cool, people making content about books, getting really into reading and sort of making reading a fun thing, because sort of you were the nerd back in the day if you were a reader versus a sports person or anything like that. And that was nice, but I just didn't really feel like reading at that time. I was in med school and then working as a doctor, and I just didn't really have the capacity or the time to read a book. I'd rather just mindlessly watch things. And then it would have been, when was it? The end of 2023. I was flying to Korea, and on my flight from Melbourne to Sydney, I stopped at the WH Smith, and I was just sort of looking around and then realizing I didn't really have much to do on the long flight, because it'd been, at that point, I think the last time I went overseas was 2018, so it'd been quite a long time since I'd been on a long flight with nothing really to do. And so at the WH Smith, I was looking at the books and I saw Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, and I messaged my friend Jess, who had started making book content by that stage, and asked her if these were good and if I should read them, and she said definitely, and so I bought both of them, and then I read about 20 books on the plane to Sydney, 20 books, and then I read about 20 pages on the flight to Sydney and didn't touch either book again. So that didn't really work. And then in June of last year, I fell down. What I was doing is my dad's girlfriend had moved in and I offered to set up her bookshelf because I need order in my life, and therefore I wanted to set it up nicely, even though it is nowhere that really impacts me, but I wanted it to be, set up. I think I did alphabetically by author for the most point. There were sort of different sections, a little bit like really old books, old kids' books from her daughter, things like that. But mostly, yeah. Once I'd done that, I sort of fell down a rabbit hole on YouTube of bookshelf reorganization videos, which made me want to get out this bookshelf. This bookshelf I've had since I was born. Could not say. The Harry Potters that are down here have been in there their whole life. Whenever they've been in a bookshelf, they've been in this bookshelf. So it's a very old bookshelf and very sturdy. And I got my bookshelf out. I got out all these because these are like all my old books from back then that I already owned, as well as sort of in other places. Got them all out and decided to have my bookshelf displayed. And then I ran out of room. And so because in every bookshelf reorganization, everyone's using the Billy bookshelf. The IKEA Billy bookshelf is the GOAT bookshelf. And I was like, no, I don't want an IKEA Billy bookshelf. I want like a nice bookshelf, like, real wood, solid type of thing. And I was looking on Facebook Marketplace and could not find anything. So, IKEA Billy bookshelf. But that meant I now needed to buy books and read, because all of my old books made absolutely no dent on this huge bookshelf. And so I started Fourth Way again, and I read through that and through Iron Flame and sort of started watching more booktube content and just got fully dead into reading, and that was it really. And now here we are, and I'm at 72 books already this year, and I'm very much back to how I was when I was younger. Now that I have the Kindle and can sort of read wherever I want, that makes it a lot easier, and just I started branching out a bit more, although if you've watched my reading journal content, it's really not that much because it's all still fantasy and romance, but I didn't read any romance really when I was younger, so that is branching shortly. Anyway, very big tangent to story about my history of reading. I think that's all I have to say, so let's go on to the actual mid-year book tag. I made the decision for this that I'm not going to repeat books as much as possible. I might use a different book from the same author, or use an author when I've already used the book by that author, things like that, but not repeat the exact same book pretty much. The first question is the best book you've read so far in 2025. For this, I have Love Unwritten by Lauren Asher. It is the second book in the Lakefront Billionaires, series. It's basically a mix of small town and billionaire romance because they're in a small town, but all the men are really rich. Anyway, the first one I really enjoyed, and then this one is about, I've forgotten their names because it's been a while. This one is about Raphael and Ali. Raphael is co-owner of a really successful building business with our main character in book one, and Ali is the nanny he hires to help with his son, as he is a single dad, and his son has retinosis pigmentosa, I believe it was, which means he basically is slowly losing his sight. And so even though he's quite a smart, independent boy, he does need a bit of a help around the house, which is why Raphael got the nanny. And basically they just have tension throughout the whole book, will they, won't they, things like that. And I ended up annotating, I don't know if you can see, sort of the last little bits, just because I felt like things were really nicely written in there. Ali is also a singer or a songwriter, and that's what is it songwriter? Yeah, I think that's what I think she's a songwriter. And so there was just some really beautiful quotes in here, like a love story that has only just begun with the best parts still left to be written, sort of things like that were really good. I really liked their relationship in this book and sort of how they communicated with each other. There was no of the miscommunication trope that I absolutely hate. The third act conflict sort of made sense, and in the book you felt them not only falling in love with each other but falling in love with themselves and their own personalities. Raphael is going through a lot after the split from his son's mother and sort of healing from that, and she sort of helps him help himself to heal. And it was just sort of a romance that I really enjoyed, even though it's quite long for a romance. It is, where are we, 600 pages, which is a very long romance, but it didn't feel like it, and it just sort of, I did really love Love Redesigned, which is the first one, but this one just felt sort of even better, and that's why I gave it 5 stars, and it is my best book so far this year. The next one is the worst book you've read so far in 2025. This is sort of generally the whole series, and just specifically this book had the lowest ranking, but it's just called the Hades Persephone Saga by Scarlett St. Clair. Basically, there are 4 books from Persephone's point of view and 3 books from Hades' point of view. And it's just sort of a retelling, reimagining of the Hades and Persephone love story, which I didn't know much about before this because I haven't read much on Greek mythology and things like that, but so that part was interesting to learn. What really bugged me and pissed me off about this series was I liked the fact that they each had their separate books, but every single time they would switch books. So the first book was Persephone and then the second book was Hades, but it was the exact same story that had just happened in the Persephone book from the perspective of Hades, where yes, sometimes obviously you get new scenes when Hades is alone and things like that and learn more about his character, but you're also then getting the exact same scenes that we'd already had before, and it was just really repetitive and annoying and not really adding much to the story, where it felt more like she could have just written having a dual POV book, so you just got Hades chapters when he went alone and learnt that bit without having all that annoying repetition and everything. This one specifically pissed me off and was the lowest scored of the bunch, because this is a Hades one. It is his second one? Yes, it is the second one of his in the series and the 4th one overall. Basically, all you see in Hades' point of view is him doing things and not telling Persephone about those things, despite saying that she's the love of his life and that he wants to keep her safe and everything, but he's just not telling her what is going on, even though it's directly impacting her life and sort of everything that goes on throughout this entire big overarching plot of the story that directly impacts her and she should know about. He just doesn't tell her for her safety or some bullshit. And that pissed me off so much about this particular book. But as I said, the series as a whole was the most annoying series that I've read this year. I surprisingly gave this 3.25 stars. So my rating system is flawed, and I got through all of them somehow, but I did I think towards the end it got better because there was just so much happening that there wasn't time for repetition, but it was still just, I wish it had been written differently. Then we have the best sequel that I've read so far in 2025, and for that I'm going to say The Songbird and the Heart of Stone by Carissa Broadbent. This one, and any that I have read on my Kindle, I obviously don't have a physical copy of, so I'll just put the cover up somewhere. Future me will decide where. That is not present me's problem. So this is the best sequel I've read so far in 2025. The Crowns of Nyaxia is a very sort of interesting and unique series in the fact that it's sort of multiple duologies stuck together as one big series. So the first 2 books were about Rain and, what the fuck's her name? What is her name? So the first 2 books are about 2 characters from one kingdom, and then this book, The Songbird and the Heart of Stone, is the 3rd book in the series, but the first book in the next duology that follows one of the side characters from this first kingdom going to one of the other kingdoms and getting involved with that family. The reason that I felt like this versus, I guess, book 2, which was The Ashes and the Star-Crossed King, the reason that I say that this one is the best sequel is it just felt like there was a lot of good writing into the FMC and the MMC, where they took a long time to actually discover that they had feelings for each other and sort of work and act on those feelings. But even before that, even when they were sort of warring, going through the plot that they're going through, most of which I cannot tell you because it sort of spoils book 1 and 2. But basically they are going on a journey together and they do not like each other, but they're forced to go on this journey together. And so they don't like each other for a lot of the time, but they still sort of understand each other and will fight for each other even without those feelings being sort of known and unleashed yet. And I really liked that aspect of the story. Overall, I've been really enjoying the series. I pretty much binged it because I started, where is it? I started Serpent and the Wings of the Night in the start of May. I read the first 2 of the duology, as well as the 2 novellas that go between, like after each of those, and then Songbird of the Heart and Stone. I read them all back to back and finished them in that month. So I really enjoyed the series overall, especially the novellas are really, honestly, should get an honorable mention for the best sequel of 2025 because they're not a sequel. They are very much novellas about different characters in the world that you then sometimes meet in the main books, but I just really enjoyed the series overall. And then the antithesis of this question, the worst sequel we've read so far in 2025, I have His Throne of Embers by Renee April. So the first book, Her Crown of Fire, and then this is the second book, His Throne of Embers. I think this was more of a me problem than a book problem and a writing problem because it had been so long since I'd read book 1. It was in 2024. I think it was just after Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, so it would have been sort of July of 2024. And I read this in February of 2025. So it was quite a bit of time between, and I had completely forgotten everything that had happened in book 1 to the point where it was confusing reading this book because I could not remember the plot of book 1 at all, and it sort of directly continued on from the end of book 1, and a major sort of thing had happened at the end of book 1, and so it was just very confusing for me, and it also felt a lot like a filler book. Like really not much happened. It was just sort of about how everyone hates her and how she doesn't deserve to be where she is and things like that. It would be interesting to go back and read book 1 and then book 2 to see if my feelings on the book changed based on having more recent remembering of the plot of book 1, but I just haven't got around to that yet. Maybe because I'm pretty sure will be a book 3. Maybe when that happens, I'll go back, sort of like I did with Onyx Storm, and read 1 and 2, and then read 3. But yeah, worst is a strong word because I really haven't had any books I've hated this year. I guess, no, Game of Retribution, the Hades Persephone doesn't count as worst sequel because I just hated it all. I didn't really even love the first book, even though that was anyway. So worst is a strong word. It's just my lowest rated, and it still was 3.25. So it wasn't terrible. That's just the answer I have for this question. Next is a new release you haven't read yet but want to. My answer for this is very simple, and it's Emily Wilde 3, which is Compendium of Lost Tales. Yes, I keep forgetting it. Anyway, so I read 1 and 2 February and March of this year, and I was really looking forward to book 3 coming out, especially because the sort of romance plot starts picking up at the end of book 2, and also the main plot of the story also does, and so I was excited to see where that goes. The only reason I haven't read it is that the print is not, where is it? Oh, can you see them? I think you can just see the white up there, but I have 1 and 2 in the small, this size print, and number 3 came out in think of this as a paperback, but big print. So I'm not buying. No, I spines must match. That is illegal to not match. And so that came out in April. I think it was April. And it is yet to come out in print in the small version, and it's August. And I keep looking in Big W and Target, where they have sort of the cheaper books, but also in the more indie bookstores where they sometimes will get, different versions of print. And no, it's still the huge version. And I refuse to pay for the Kindle version when I want to buy the physical version because I don't care. I really enjoyed the series, but I don't care about it enough to do that. So basically, I'm just waiting for that small print to come out before I can read it, and that's the reason I haven't read it yet. Next is the most anticipated release for the second half of 2025. This is sort of a repeat from my last answer, but it is the sequel to The Songbird and the Heart of Stone. I don't know what it's called. I'm pretty sure it just came out the other day, last week, and I can't remember what it's called, but I really want to read that because the way that Songbird and Heart of Stone ended was really good. and I want to see where it's going from that. And just overall, I've really enjoyed the series, so it's pretty obvious why. Like, there's also a few other books coming out. There's, what else was there? There was Viper's book 2, which is Beautiful Venom's sequel. There's, I think, book 5 of Crown of Xanaxia is also coming out. I think, I don't have my reading journal with me where I keep this information, but I did just look at it. Lakefront Billionaires number 3, I think, is supposed to come out as well. There's quite a lot of sequels to series I'm already reading that are meant to come out in the second half of this year. And so I basically want to read them all, obviously, because I enjoyed their prequels. But the one I'm most looking forward to out of the ones that I've written down so far in my reading journal is definitely Crowns of Nyaxia 4. And then we have the biggest surprise of this year. This I found hard to answer. And so the ones that I've chosen, it's the Court of Ravens trilogy, which is Feathers So Vicious and Shadows So Cruel. My friend demanded that I read, or I don't know if she demanded or she just gave me the recommendation that because she really enjoyed it, but it was a book that I was expecting it just to be sort of another romantasy type of book, but it actually was really different. The general premise is that they live in a world where there are humans and there are ravens, which is, yes, the bird, but they're sort of these magical, they're sort of magi witches that can metamorphose into a murder of ravens? Plural of ravens. Plural, no, not a group of ravens. Unkindness, duh. It's been a while since I've read it. They did mention that a lot in the book. So these magical humans can change into a group of ravens, and that is part of their magical skill. They also have other abilities and things like that, and the story is about a human girl, and why have I forgotten how she ends up with them? The synopsis does not help me. I think it's the FMC is getting forced to marry, she's getting forced to marry the crown prince or someone in the royal family. And while she's on the way traveling to this marriage, she gets kidnapped by the ravens and sold off, like is then part of a ransom to her father, who is like a duke or something like that, to get her back. And yeah, sort of it goes from there. I can't really say any more than that. It is a why choose, and I think that's what shocked me, is that I sort of enjoyed the why choose aspect of it. And just in general, it was a very different premise for a fantasy that I hadn't really seen before that I enjoyed. And so that is why it was my biggest shock of the year. My favorite new author, this can either be a debut or a new to you author, is going to be sort of another repeat again. It is just Carissa Broadbent. I really enjoyed the Crowns of Nyaxia series, and including the novellas, and just enjoyed her way of writing and storytelling and everything, especially when those novellas are such a break in the normal story. It's not sort of like the Powerless novella where it's the same story, it's just different character in the story, whereas these are much more pulled apart from the main storyline. And so that was really interesting. And then also the idea of having such a big series but it being cut up into duologies. Everything that goes along with this series just really interested me, and so I really enjoyed her decision making with it. She does have other series that I am yet to read, but I would like to. I think I haven't read the synopsis of them to see if they'd be something that I'm interested in, but it would be good to see how she writes in her previous series versus sort of when you read their newest series, it's their most polished thing versus, like, you know, their first book they've ever written. Next is, oh god, this is just a Carissa Broadbent video, isn't it? Next is your newest fictional crush. This is Azar. He's the MMC in Songbird and Heart of Stone, along with Misha is the FMC. Misha. I don't know how to pronounce it. But Azar is definitely my newest fictional crush that isn't problematic. I've been reading a lot of dark romance recently, and it feels wrong to choose any of them. But if I did, it'd probably be 0. Anyway, we'll go with Azar. And I just really enjoyed how he communicated with Mish, how he sort of his backstory and his personality in general. And he just seemed like a good man despite all the things that are said about him in the book. And so I just really enjoyed reading him, especially his points of views. So that was really enjoyable and definitely at the moment probably the biggest crush that I have. Next is the book that made you cry. I don't remember specifically crying this year, but I think I did for, this is The Rainfall Market by Yoo Kwang. This is a Korean translated fiction. It is about a girl who, in this sort of fictional universe, there is a rainfall market that opens during the monsoon season only for a week, and if you go in you can get your wildest dreams, but if you don't leave in time then you can never get out. And so this is a girl who doesn't live a very great life, her home life isn't great, and she wants to go in there to make it better. And so she gets a ticket and she gets to go in. And I really enjoyed how this story went, and it was just very interesting and different. But the reason it made me cry was something that happens at the end of the book that I can't really say without spoiling, but it was sort of something happens to someone during the climax of the book, and then it's sort of the resolution to what happens in the climax, and it just really got me. And yeah, definitely do recommend this book, especially if you haven't got much into translated fiction. I feel like this is the least intrusive. I find sometimes the way they're written is a lot more poetic than, I also haven't read much literary fiction in English, so it may just be literary fiction in general, but all the translated books I have are very much literary fiction, and they're very sort of poetic and deep and not fantasy romance. So this one is sort of very easy to read in that way. Then we have books that made you happy. For this, I chose the Zodiac Academy series. I really enjoyed the series. I had watched Larry. I watched her spoiler vlogs of reading this entire series and then decided to read it myself when I saw it was on Kindle Unlimited, and I had helpfully forgotten everything that had actually happened in Larry's vlogs until I got to that point in the book and I was like, oh yeah, that's happening, isn't it? I did enjoy the series. The main reason it made me happy though was because I finally finished it. I decided to read all the novellas and do the tandem of 8 and 8.5, and it was just a lot, and I did them all pretty much back to back. I think I was also at that point rereading Bloodlines and Vampire Academy, and it was just a lot that I was deciding to do at once, and I was just so happy to be done with it and know the story. And I also really did enjoy the ending. I feel like Caroline and Suzanne really sort of wrapped it up well, although they have a habit of writing really, really long epilogues, which was annoying in Dark Fae, but I think it was just as annoying in Zodiac. I finished this in February, so I can't remember exactly. But I did like how they finished up with the grand climax and the final fights and everything and sort of stuff like that. And so that did make me happy, but mainly it was finishing it. The second last book is The Most Beautiful Books You've Bought So Far This Year, and that means that I have to go and get them down. So at the start of this year, I found randomly online a picture of these really beautiful editions of Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, and I found out they were the Korean editions, and I was going to Korea in April. So I went and I bought them, and they are so beautiful and interesting. They are sort of like manhwa, manga illustrations. So they are just like really beautifully done and really nice to look at. And they actually split up Iron Flame into 2 parts, but I really love the illustrations on this, and they actually have quotes in the back. I know this one. So yeah, they have quotes in Korean on the back. Obviously the whole book is also written in Korean, so it is a goal of mine one day to be able to read this. But they have quotes on the back, and this one says 난 오늘 죽지 않을 거야, which means I will not die today, which is sort of the classic Fourth Wing quote that there is. And so each book has a quote on it, and they're just so beautiful. The art is so beautiful. They also came with little transparent art cards of the art that's on the covers, and I'm so glad I bought them. I'm so sad, despite going in April, that the Onyx Storm version wasn't there. I don't know if it does exist yet, but I would like to get it when it does, whether I order it online, because that is possible, or I just wait until I go back to Korea again and buy it at the bookstore again. I don't know which way I'll go, but it would be really good to get them. The final question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? My answer for this is just going to be my 2024 / overall physical TBR. This is, I don't think it's too big at the moment. I bought so many books during last year to try and fill out my bookshelf and read more things and everything. And I did really well with reading what I was buying until I got my Kindle. And then I started only reading on the Kindle and not reading what I was buying. My main things that I haven't been reading is my translated books, which are up here. I have most of them. I have 1, 2, 10. I have 10 of them out of like 15, 17 that I haven't read yet. And then I have a few other things on my other shelves, like what have I not read from last year yet? The Library of Borrowed Hearts. Actually, not that much. I think that's all. Swordcatcher. You're sitting on Swordcatcher. I knew there was something else. And then sort of from this year, I have Quicksilver, Iron and Embers, When the Moon Hatched, The God in the Gumiho, The God in the Guishin. There is The Lost Book of the White. Is that what it's called? Oh, that's the second one. The Red Scroll of Magic, another Cassandra Clare book, and Lost Book of the White. So yeah, there's just a few things that I haven't read that I want to get around to reading, because I don't like having so many that I haven't read, because I want to guilt-free buy more. And so that is my plan at the moment. So on my TBR this month, I have The Full Moon Coffee Shop, Quicksilver, When the Moon Hatched, and Swordcatcher. I'm looking, being like, what are they? You're sitting on them on the tripod. My very fancy setup. So I'm trying to encourage myself to read more of them, as well as I have so many books on my KU wish list. I just made, like, you can have an Amazon lists of stuff on the like Kindle versions of stuff, and I have so many things. I also have my 25 in 2025 in my reading journal that I don't think I'm even halfway through yet, that I want to get on to reading more of them, so I should be more conscious about trying to read them. There's things on there like Akata, Persuasion, I think it's Persuasion, yeah. There's just a lot of books that I did want to read, as well as my yearly goal of I wanted to read, I think it was 10 classics. I haven't read one yet, and I want to read 20 translated books. I've read like 3, so there's a lot I want to get done by the end of this year. And it will involve me doing less mood reading, which I've been doing a lot for the start of this year. So it's not the end of the world if I don't finish these things. My main priority is just my physical TBR, because I want to buy more books pretty much. And I feel like I shouldn't, with the lack of physical. It's not even how many I have on my physical TBR. It's the fact that I'm reading in my Kindle and I'm not picking up physical books. So I want to read my physical TBR to encourage me to pick back up physical books again, so that I don't feel like I'm buying physical books for not reading them, because I want to read on my Kindle. That is the mid-year book tag, and I've waffled a lot and I'm dreading editing this, but you're already seeing me after I've edited this, so you're welcome. Say in the comments below your answers to the mid-year book tag, and if you want to make your own video about it, I will put all the questions in the description box. If you enjoyed this video about reading and books, you should check out my recent July book summary and August reading journal setup, where I show you how I use my reading journal, as well as talk about the 10 books that I read in July. And thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.